it's so easy to focus on just the advertising, just the billboard, look what we came up with. But we really need to know, who are we talking to? And then, did they listen? Did we see any results from that? And that's really a huge engine behind our marketing effort. And I know many of your listeners is that accountability partner who can do a mind meld with the creatives so that we know where we're going.
Okay, guys, since we started the Destination Marketing Podcast a little over a year ago, I've had several destinations reach out and say, hey, could you help me start a podcast? And at first we were kind of like, well, no, that's not really what we do. But after enough requests, we said, you know what, let's explore this. And we've created a turnkey program for destinations where we will produce, we will host, we will edit, and we will publish your podcast for your destination on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis. And all you have to do is show up and answer some questions. We're really excited about this program. We've got a few destinations that have been doing really, really well with their podcast. And if you've ever thought about creating a podcast for your destination, but you don't have all the equipment, or you don't have the expertise or any of that type of stuff, let us take that off your hands. Let Relic handle your podcast creation and production, and all you have to do is show up and answer questions about all the amazing things there are to do within your destination. So let me know if you're interested. Email me at adam@relicagency.com and we'll get you set up on this podcast program. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Destination Marketing Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Stoker. I'm excited to be with you today. We've got a great show for you today, and we're going to be talking about a topic that I feel like gets overlooked a little bit in destination marketing at times, and I'm excited to have a guest on that'll walk us through it today. Our guest today is from a destination that I got to visit last year for the first time, and I fell in love with it. His name is Mitch Whitten, and he is the Executive Vice President of Marketing at Visit Fort Worth. Mitch, welcome to the show.
Adam, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Oh, absolutely. And we're excited to have you. I'm stoked to jump into the meat of the conversation today. But before we do, we've got a couple of standard icebreaker questions we like to ask everybody that comes on the show. And we're going to make no exception with you. So the first question, Mitch, that I have for you is, what is your dream destination? If you could go anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Well, I have to say that we've been inspired by our mayor, who is an avid cyclist, to do a lot of cycling. And so I've really been looking forward to some cycling vacations. I'd really like to get out to kind of the back roads of Europe and frankly, even the back roads of Texas. But I'm really looking at Brecon Beacons when we can fly internationally again. This is a national park in Wales, and would like to have some adventure out there on two wheels. But there's so much going on with adventure travel right now, and when we can really get back out and moving around, I'd like to get on my bike and see a different part of the country.
Great. And so were you a cyclist before the mayor really had that influence on you, or is that something you got into after getting in your role?
Great question. I was a wannabe runner and basically just trying to keep up, and had done some half marathons. And she, when she came into office, she started a bike tour called Tour de Fort Worth that overlapped with Tour de France. And so we would bike around the city together, and she would have town halls in motion, and really encourage a lot of people to get on their bikes, explore the 100 miles of trails here. And so I got a bike and started, which I hadn't ridden since I was a kid. And you really see things a lot differently when you're riding around than when you're in your car. And so it's been a lot of fun exploring and learning to ride on two wheels again.
Oh man, that sounds like a lot of fun. So tell me about Brecon Beacons. Did I say that correctly?
Well, it's just one of those dream destinations. It's a national park in Wales. I've not been. It's some friends in London, which is one of, again, when we were traveling internationally, a lot of visitors here from the UK to Texas, and had recommended I get out there. It's you can hike across it, you can bike across it. There's some inns you can stay in along the way. So it seems like a classic UK outdoor adventure. And but I should probably head to Utah first, to your neck of the woods. Utah's got the best skiing in the United States. Maybe go down south and see some all the great natural rock formations y'all have. I love your state, and probably should get there first.
Yeah, Mitch, I might be biased, but I do think that Utah is definitely a place that you want to try to go first. I know you've been here for skiing, right? You came and visited Park City.
I learned to ski at Park City. I was a late bloomer on the slopes, and my wife grew up skiing, and we had some friends in Park City and came up there, and we're very, very fortunate to get to learn in Park City, and went for several years and really enjoyed the skiing there. It's you have the best snow in the country, and miss it a lot. It's a great destination.
Well, you got to come out. I'll show you the rest of the state that you haven't yet had the opportunity to see. So that would be great.
Let's do it. I'd love to.
Well, Mitch, tell me about your favorite vacation you've ever been on. What's your favorite destination you've ever visited?
Well, I just talked a lot about adventure travel and getting out into the country, which is relatively new for me, and doing more of that. But I have to say, Paris is a classic destination I enjoy every time I go. My wife and I went before we got married. We had just graduated from college. And although I like getting out to the outdoors, it's such a beautiful city. And in a lot of ways, it is an outdoor city. Walking around, discovering neighborhoods, sitting on those outdoor cafes, people watching, experiencing different cultures. It's time and again, it's my favorite city in the world. And I find the people to be incredibly hospitable, and it's just a beautiful place.
Do you have an experience there that stands out, or a memory from that trip?
Well, there's really two. One is you can't beat that cafe culture where you're sitting outside and watching people. But the best example of that for us was several years ago, the World Cup was on, and we wandered into the Marais district and sat outside in an Italian restaurant, and there were many different nationalities at different cafes cheering for their teams, and of course they were cheering for France. And the electricity of the community was so inspiring and so much fun. A great sports event, a great Paris event, and a great French event. And then years later, a couple of years after that, I took my kids, and I had remembered that one of our favorite memories was going to the Luxembourg Gardens, where people take their little sailboats out in the spring and they push them around the water. And I told the kids how cool this was, and they were going to see this. And we get all the way over there, having walked across the city, and the sailboats don't come out for another week. And the kids were like, "Dad, where are the boats?" but so a little disappointing. But overall, they had a great visit, and it was one of their first times to be in a different place where people spoke a different language and a very different culture from theirs. So it's a favorite for us.
Oh, I can definitely relate to the World Cup and the energy that comes along with that. I was in Sao Paulo, Brazil, when Brazil won the World Cup in 2000. Let's see, it was 2002, and I mean the amount of energy and noise and celebration when they scored that final goal, and when the game ended, it was unreal. And so experiencing the World Cup in another country is something that man, not a lot of people get the opportunity to do. It sounds like you had a lot of fun with that in France.
Well, I think that's why we miss sports so much. It's not just watching the competition, which we can do on TV or listen to on the radio. It's when you can be there and experience the community that comes together around sports. You get to know the people sitting next to you. You get to feel the pride the community has in their team. If you've never seen a football game in the UK, definitely put that on your list. I was fortunate enough last year to see Arsenal play, and that was my first European football game, and just the community and that whole cultural experience was so much fun. Definitely why we need to get back to sports tourism.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I'm a sports guy myself, and yeah, I missed that part of my life because it was a big part of my life before March.
Definitely.
Well, Mitch, let's dive in. I appreciate you answering those questions. Let's talk a little bit more about you and the role you're in today. I'd like to learn about your background and what kind of led you to where you are today.
Well, I really got into tourism before I knew it. I was doing it and didn't know that's what we were doing. And let me explain. I really came out of journalism and into marketing. So a lot of marketers, we like to talk about how we're storytellers, whether we are writing, video, social media, whatever the tools, and we're really sharing the stories of our of news or of a destination. But before I got into tourism, I spent 12 years as head of marketing for a private university in Dallas. Many people have heard of SMU, home of the Mustangs, and
Yeah.
the now home of the George W. Bush Presidential Library. So when you're marketing a university, people, it's funny, you think about it, people want a map. They want to visit. They want to know what it's like to live there. Where are the good places to eat? What's it like to be a local there? Many of our students came from out of state or certainly out of the city. So I never really thought about that as a tourism job, but it really was. And after about 12 years, we had some very successful campaigns. We had landed and opened the Bush Presidential Center, a great place for history and an attraction in its own right. And I had the opportunity to join the Visit Fort Worth, which is about a 45-minute drive from Dallas. And I reflected back and thought, I've really been doing a lot of this in terms of building visitation programs for a university. That's what you do in higher education. You want visitors and you want them to buy into your destination. So that's how I really got into where we are now at Visit Fort Worth.
Very cool. Well, and it's interesting when you say that marketing a university is like marketing a destination. I mean, essentially, you are trying to sell the university as a destination for students, and so I see the correlation there.
Well, and of course, many of us have learned now that educational tourism is really important to a lot of our cities. We have a number of universities in the Metroplex that we share with Dallas. And think of the students who come here and they leave and they take our story with us. They certainly spend money here. Their parents come and visit and spend money here. And they bring research here, which enhances our reputation. And so in a lot of ways, that was an educational experience for me, learning how universities and research institutions contribute to that. So it's been an education and learning about that component of our industry.
Awesome. Awesome. Great stuff. Well, let's talk about Fort Worth. I was able to go there last year for the Texas Travel Summit, and we stayed at the Renaissance Hotel there and just had a wonderful time in Fort Worth. The dining was great. The people were great. We just had a wonderful time. Tell me a little bit about Fort Worth as a destination.
Well, we were so glad to have you, and I hope you found what most of our visitors found, which Fort Worth is a really easy place to visit. And if you want to experience a bit of Texas and Texas hospitality, it's the best place to experience that.
Absolutely.
We have a lot of Texas heritage, the famous cattle drives, probably made most famous in Larry McMurtry's great novel, Lonesome Dove. Later became a TV series, those cattle drives that moved cattle up, one of the early industries that rescued Texas from the Civil War, really put Fort Worth on the map. So twice a day, we reenact that cattle drive in our historic stockyards district. And people come from all over the world to understand and to experience what that part of Texas is like. But it also means some other things. A lot of the people who struck it big in cattle and later oil, kind of those Texas stereotype icons, they turned those riches around and invested them in their communities. So we have an incredible arts scene, an incredible music scene, and a lot of that's been made possible by the investment they made back in their city.
That sounds great. Sounds great. So tell me kind of the main things that people come to Fort Worth for. What are they seeking out?
The real headlines are that Western experience. As I mentioned, the cattle drive and the certainly shops and restaurants around that and authentic and new Texas food. But then again, when you talk about arts, we have 5 museums that are adjacent to each other it's really a park, a big park called the Cultural District. So let me say this, really Fort Worth got its start in the art scene back in 1892. And at a time when Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid literally were just getting into the train robbing business, the women on the frontier in Fort Worth said, we're going to have art out here. We're going to have culture. And they opened what became the first museum in Texas. And ever since then, Fort Worth has been avid about collecting and sharing art and culture. So, for example, not only the first museum in Texas, the first opera company in Texas, the first botanic garden in Texas, the Kimball Art Museum has Michelangelo's first painting. We have a whole museum dedicated to cowgirls and the women of the West. So really, that is a whole day in itself in the Arts District. And that is not just for families like mine and yours, but also really significant arts leaders from around the world who come to see these riches.
Great, great. Sounds to me like Fort Worth is a leader in the tourism industry in Texas, and even from creating those attractions, I kept hearing first. Fort Worth has been on the front lines. Tell me a little bit about you as the executive vice president of marketing at Fort Worth. Tell me the main duties of your role.
Well, there's no question that we market the city, and we recognize that comes in many different forms. And I think we've spent the last really 3 to 5 years trying to unlock all the different reasons people come to visit, and asking ourselves, what can we do to celebrate that? What can we do to expand that? So let me explain. So we certainly, for many years, we looked at our visitors as leisure and convention or business. And that was kind of it. But then we started to notice that a lot of people really, we started to ask ourselves, what were the reasons people were coming to visit? And we recognized that local quality of life was a big driver. So all the investment you and I just talked about was a big reason people wanted to come experience that. They wanted to see what our downtown was like. Why had we invested hundreds of millions into a downtown renaissance to experience Fort Worth like a local? But we also recognized that the local passion for the city was the magnet for visitors. It wasn't my ad. It was not the tagline an agency came up with. It was really about why were locals so passionate? Why are we growing so quickly? Why are people coming to move here? So we started diversifying our marketing and celebrating the ways Fort Worth was growing. So for example, we became the first certified music-friendly city in Texas. New program by the governor's office, responding to really all the young creatives moving to town. We've seen movements in our art community, a lot more support for art. That's why we have an explosion of murals and public art in our city now. Filmmaking is growing. Many of you may have seen the new movie Miss Juneteenth that has now been named one of the top streaming movies for the summer, filmed in Fort Worth, created by a Fort Worth writer-director. So it's really a lot of that young creative energy is really growing our destination, which is a really nice compliment to all the Old West that we celebrate as well.
Great. And before we take a break, I want to ask you, because I can hear that you do a lot of listening and a lot of information gathering, and I know research is really important to you. So I'd love to hear why Fort Worth is a destination, and maybe you personally are so committed to research, and then we'll take a small break.
Well, you asked about my responsibilities, and in leading the outreach for marketing, we get very excited about the creativity. We get excited about doing activations out of town, as many of your listeners do. We've been at South by Southwest the last 2 years before COVID, really telling the story in new ways. But that is not going to be successful if we don't have an accountability partner. And that's what I joke. That's how I joke about our research director, Lauren Phillips. She really is our accountability in terms of who are we marketing to? Is this fact-based? Do we know what we're saying? And it's so easy to focus on just the advertising, just the billboard. Look what we came up with. But we really need to know who are we talking to, and then did they listen? Did we see any results from that? And that's really a huge engine behind our marketing effort. And I know many of your listeners is that accountability partner who can really provide that information and really be a part of the team and do a mind meld with the creatives so that we know where we're going.
Well, I love your attitude and commitment towards research. I love that you've created an accountability partner role in your research director. And, I have a passion for research, and I want to talk more about specifically how you guys leverage and use your research when we come back. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Relic. As many of you know, I own an advertising agency called Relic, and we work specifically with tourism destinations. If there's any of you that are struggling with what to do next, or you've tried agencies that don't specialize in tourism, or if you've been using the local flavor for years and years and you're just looking for something new, I would say give us a call. Give us the opportunity to take a look at your plans, see what you're doing, use our tourism knowledge and industry specialty to examine everything from your brand to your tactical execution and make recommendations of how to help. We'll do that assessment for free. We'll give you those recommendations for free. And if you like what we say, maybe you can hire us to execute on those plans. So kind of a risk-free opportunity to have us take a holistic look at everything you're doing, provide some recommendations, and you can kind of see us in action. If you're interested in having us do something like that, please send me an email directly at adam@relicagency.com. I would love to set that up with my team. So Mitch, we started talking about research a moment ago, and for me, I feel like everybody wants to skip to the fun part of marketing, which is, the creation phase where you get to build your campaigns, you build your plan. But marketing is getting the right message to the right people at the right time. And research is your vehicle to make sure you know who the right people are, what the right message is that will resonate, and when's the best time for them to receive it, right? And so tell me a little bit about your research strategy as a whole, and maybe just kind of how you guys look at it and leverage it.
I think there's really two big points to that answer. One, this person who leads research has to have a high profile in the organization. This is not just sneaking numbers to, into the board report to make sure we check that box. This person is a champion for information. And she is positioned not only within our organization, but also the community to share information. We want to be valuable to our local community, to our local stakeholders, to our partners, so that we're proactively sharing information that they see that we have an expertise that can be helpful to them. And so the first big point is you really have to make a commitment, celebrate the research, and make sure that that person is interacting with people at the highest level and across your partners. I think the second point is always being nimble in that research and staying fresh. Does she have the right tools? Is she able to, are you supporting that person with enough time and funds to the best you can to interpret that research? I think a lot of us buy a lot of data, but are we really taking the time, or do we have the investment to interpret it?
Yeah, gathering the data is one thing, right? Collecting the information, but the analysis of that data and turning that into actionable insights is really kind of where the rubber hits the road, I guess, as far as coming up with an effective campaign. Because I think one of the reasons, and I'm going to ask you this question in just a second, but one of the reasons I feel like destinations neglect research is because they don't necessarily know what to do with the data once they gather it. So I don't know, do you want to speak to maybe why destinations might unfortunately neglect research?
I think we try to do too many things at the same time or without the resources to really do them well. And I think one of the results that may come out of the COVID crisis is a whittling down of those things that may not be as important anymore and focusing on those things that are. So, for example, if you want to be big in visitor centers and that visitor experience and the visitor interaction in your city, go for it and let's put your money into that and your time. If you want to be a support to small business, go for it. We've made a decision that research is a high priority in terms of investment, but not only in terms of just buying data, because there are a lot of great systems out there that we certainly bought and that others buy that you can get the data in. But we all know that the data sits there. And you have to invest in time and partners to help you interpret that and to decide what are you going to do with that. And that's why the people investment's important. We work not only with a great internal staff member, but also with the new team at Entrada that's really kind of carved out a part of the market to help people like me interpret the data.
Yeah, they're a Utah company.
They are just up the road. And so I think that I think one of the things we don't like to talk about in the industry, money is easy to talk about. Is your funding up? Is your funding down? Is your funding under threat? Is your funding secure? But we don't talk a lot about time. And we say we really need to think about, are we allowing ourselves, our teams, the time to do, to give research the full support that it needs? certainly the analysis, but also the spending the time with the team to share it and help make decisions on an informed basis.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. You got to support that research team. If you're going to do it, you commit to it, right? And I think that's great advice. Tell me, let's get tactical. Some people look at research as focus groups, surveys, interviews, man on the street. Like, tell me a little bit about the tactics you guys use to gather the information for your research.
One of the things that we have focused on in the last number of years is Fort Worth's awareness. We can see our bookings going up and some of the ROI on our advertising at the bottom of the funnel, but we saw a deficit of awareness at the top of the funnel, that we weren't growing people's awareness from our key drive markets. So one of the things we really focused on is simple surveying of potential travelers coming from our drive markets, and you can do that through panel surveys, which we do. We also look at organic web traffic from those markets, and just to see that, because Fort Worth is not one of the top 3 destinations in Texas. We have a lot of competition in Texas, a lot of great cities. We have beaches, we have mountains, and how we position Fort Worth to rise in that list. And we've seen that now grow over the last 3 years, because through targeting, we've been able to reach more people in those cities, knowing that that was one of our goals. And then, of course, we want them to stay longer. We were lagging in the length of stay we wanted to see from our visitors. We always want to see that grow, but we've seen that increase too, because we focused on sharing more of the things to do in Fort Worth. So Arrivalist was certainly helpful with analyzing that, and so really focusing on awareness and then length of stay have been 2 of our biggest goals.
Yeah, and see, I love that, because the 2 insights that you were able to get from the research that you were doing is, one, that you're missing that top of funnel awareness, which if you're not doing the research and information gathering there, you don't know that you're missing that, right? And then the second one that I really like is as you guys were looking at length of stay, you could see a deficit there from where you want it to be. None of that happens if you're not looking at and analyzing that data. And so the primary research that you're doing in those surveys, and then utilizing the data that you have access to understand length of stay, all of those to me are critical points to understand how to pivot in your marketing as needed. So I really like that. I know that recently you guys were able to leverage some of the research that you had gathered to support one of your partners as they were working on a grant application. Would you be able to walk us through kind of the process for that?
Well, as I mentioned, we really want our research and our whole organization to be seen in our community as a huge value add, indispensable. So a couple of months ago, our near South Side district, every city has its own version of a little Brooklyn. Arts, creative agencies, your hub of creativity. That's where all the new experimental restaurants pop up. And so this is just on the south side of downtown. And they came to us and they were looking to be designated as an official Texas arts district, which unlocks a lot of potential grants and other recognition for them. And they needed visitor information. And I was so gratified that they, because of our relationship, felt they could call and get some visitor data for us. We had identified them as a point of interest, had been tracking that for a number of years, and was able to give them that information. Was a big help in their application. And it really was just a great anecdote that demonstrates that the importance of being responsive to your partners, that it does take an investment of time. I mean, let's be honest. It's easy to say, yep, we're going to brief our partners and check a box. This is an investment of hours and days and weeks in getting to know people, in listening to them, and it takes away from other things. It may mean that I stay home from a conference that I might have attended in the past because I want to do some partner visits. That time has to come from somewhere. And it really was that investment of time and relationships that I think opened that door so that our partners like the near South Side could come to us and say, we need your help.
Perfect. And I like to get tactical when I'm diving into this. How could another destination do this? So my question to you is, how do you inform your stakeholders and partners that this information is available, that they can reach out to you for research data or anything like that you've collected?
It really goes back to the positioning of the research director. And so Lauren on our team regularly briefs our board, our committees of hoteliers, our committees of partners, and sometimes and just to be specific, sometimes it's just sharing some fun insights. It may not be actionable right away, but it may be some fun updates about some behavior or visitors we may not have known before. Other times it may be hardcore analysis on the behavior of folks in town from over a certain weekend. Maybe they were in town for a Cowboys game down the road at AT&T Stadium. Maybe they were in town for the rodeo here that brings 1 million people. And it really is about their profile. I mean, I think it's important to, like I said, share this information regularly. And you better do it with your board, because as far as getting funding support for this, whether it's funded by your operating budget, our research is funded by our tourism public improvement district. We want the board to understand that this is a huge part of what we do, and certainly a high funding priority. So we make sure that Lauren is in front of our boards and committees regularly.
Great advice. Great advice. You don't have her in a basement somewhere behind a computer. You actually get her out in front of the community so people can see that they can have access to that information.
Exactly the way it needs to be.
Perfect. Well, let's pivot a little bit, because there was something else in our conversation we had last week that kind of stood out to me. And our country's dealing with some real issues, including racial issues. And I've seen a lot of people make statements, but I've seen a lot less people actually have their actions match those statements. And I think it goes a level deeper when you're willing to make a statement, but then action on it. And you guys in Fort Worth, one of the things I really appreciated that I saw that you did is you came up with this landing page called discoverdiversefortworth.com. And I want to have you talk about, and what we don't do on this podcast is really dive into political issues or anything like that. It's more the tactical execution that I'm looking for to have you talk about, of understanding that you had a problem, you guys had an opinion, and what are the actions that you took? Because I really like how you approached this.
Well, it really goes back to the fundamental belief that we are not just doing tourism over in a vacuum. That if an organization like ours is valuable to the community, then we're helping solve community problems, or we're helping work toward community solutions. So last fall, a woman named Tatiana Jefferson was murdered in her home by a white police officer, and Ms. Jefferson was Black. And this created, well before George Floyd died this year, created a huge conversation and huge crisis in our own community. And we asked ourselves, how could we respond to this? Well, for a number of years, we had been working with different community partners, trying to tell community stories, not based on what I thought, but based on what the community said was the story. And I think that's a big conversation in marketing right now. Is the visit organization a gatekeeper? Do they own the brand? Do they curate the brand? It's probably more the latter. So and I appreciate your comments about our website. I would say that we certainly would not hold ourselves up as to having solved any problems, or we don't think marketing fixes policy or to your point, addresses political issues. But we can point to the kind of city we want to be and shine a light on the right direction. So we worked with a number of community partners. We hired some filmmakers, not some of the usual suspects we may have worked with in the past, but we worked with some young filmmakers in the community, and we asked them to help us tell the story of Black Fort Worth, Hispanic Fort Worth, bloggers writing about LGBTQ perspectives, all related to tourism, visitation. Tourism, people do love to hear about history. So some of our website addresses the history of Fort Worth from a Black perspective or Hispanic perspective, and really helping bring and elevate those local voices was really what it was all about for us.
Yeah, I really love that, because as a tourism destination, you have a lot of people coming in that want to support businesses that match their intrinsic values. And so, for example, if I'm a Hispanic person and I want to make sure I support Hispanic businesses when I go to Fort Worth, the landing page that you've created gives me the opportunity to do that, right? And so it's once again, it's not making a political statement or anything like that, but you're providing the roadmap for someone to be able to match their trip to their values and support the businesses that match up with their interests and values. And I think that's really cool. The other thing that I really like that you did is and you alluded to this, but I want to make sure that we call it out specifically, is to tell the story of Black-owned businesses in Fort Worth. You hired a film crew owned by Black Fort Worth residents, right? And so you actually had the money that you spent to tell the story be spent on the people best equipped to tell that story, right?
Yeah. So again, to your point, for us, there's nothing political about celebrating diversity and making sure in your community that you're working with the entire community. Does tourism benefit just a few, or does tourism benefit all? And so, which was really the genesis of our campaign we rolled out in 2019. Y'all means all, and we want everyone to feel welcome in Fort Worth, Texas. So to tell that story again, we decided it was not up to me, to just our team, that we would ask a Black filmmaker to partner with a white filmmaker, to partner with a Hispanic filmmaker, to get different perspectives. And I think one thing that I've not heard talked a lot about in the tourism community, that a number of organizations do, especially NGOs, is, are we tracking the number of minority and women-owned businesses we work with? Are we tracking the vendors we work with, the partners, and to making sure that we're, again, working toward community solutions, being a part of the community, and not just operating in a vacuum? Our business goes so far beyond just booking hotel rooms, and you've talked about this on your show. We really are contributing to the community and to helping the city grow in the way it wants to.
Yeah, Mitch, one of the things that really stands out to me here, and it's funny because I haven't thought about this until you were talking just then, explaining your process. A lot of people talk about over-tourism, and over-tourism has been kind of a hot button. But the reality is you have about the top 5 to 10 attractions or restaurants or, all the other things within a community. And then a lot of other businesses are struggling, even though over-tourism is a topic. And so providing this different a spin or perspective for a visitor of saying, okay, I can go support this type of businesses or businesses owned by these people, it actually is going to allow somewhat of a solution to the over tourism issue, because we can distribute traffic in a different way than we ever have before, which is another reason I really like what you guys have done here.
Well, it's interesting for Fort Worth. Certainly, although we have almost 1 million residents, we're not an Orlando, a Vegas. We know we're a secondary destination. We don't have a theme park or an ocean, but we have, before COVID, we track really north of 9 million visitors a year, and it's a great part of our local economy. One of the things I'd like to see develop really reminds me of my days back in marketing at university, where we certainly looked at the overall number of applications, but we really started looking at where we wanted to see incremental growth. And I think this goes back to research as well. I think tourism organizations have an opportunity to start asking themselves how they can build the visitation base they want. So, for example, our community is working on some innovation zones related to mobility, transportation, and medical. How can we help bring those conventions to town? How can we support the growth in those industries? Is really part of it. Again, on the conversation you and I just had, if we want to be more welcoming to Black visitors, Hispanic visitors, how can we see growth in those categories? And it's really an evolution away from just looking at the big numbers. We've all celebrated the big economic impact. We should celebrate the number of jobs, but how do we refine those goals so that the research of the future is really moving toward how do we search how do we celebrate full-time jobs? How do we celebrate economic impact, not just overall, but in different parts of the city?
Yeah. Great stuff, Mitch. Well, I appreciate you sharing kind of your strategy there with the different, both with research and what you've done to demonstrate support for diverse businesses and diverse cultures and diverse visitors. Tell me if you could give us kind of your parting thought, your big piece of advice that you'd give any destination dealing with today's struggles and challenges. What would it be?
Adam, we really have to spend more time listening to our communities. And there's a lot of talk about pivoting to local support, but that really shouldn't have anything to do with COVID. Tourism and the visitor economy can really be an exciting part of the community's overall growth, their overall aspirations. What kind of city do they want to be? And that requires time. And so for marketers out there, asking your community partners, getting to know people you didn't know, and saying, how can we help? What are your goals? And being more of a fabric of the community. That's going to take a minute and a dollar away from something else. And for different people, it will be different things. I probably in the past few years, have missed some conferences here and there, some opportunities out of town to grow in the industry, where I have spent time with our leadership, getting to know new people, new parts of town I didn't know. And it's a longer haul, but it is more rewarding, I think, to bringing tourism bureaus closer in with the people around them. That's my best thought.
Well, and Mitch, it only makes sense that somebody that's passionate about research like you are, your parting thought would be listen, because that is another factor, another principle of research. And so I think it's great advice. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge with us today. Thanks so much.
You're welcome, Adam. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate people like you who are elevating the conversation. No one has all the right answers, and we learn a lot from you. Thanks again for including us.
Thank you. Well, everybody, this has been another great episode of the Destination Marketing Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a rating or a review. We obviously are trying to climb up those search results in all of the different podcast channels that you're listening in, and we would really appreciate that rating or review. So thanks, everybody, and have a great week. Okay, everybody, we've been talking about recovery for a while now, and my team at Relic has been working on recovery campaigns for several destinations over the last couple of months. They've actually developed a pretty amazing, we'll call it an algorithm, to know when it's safe to do acquisition marketing in a market. And so what I mean by that is you've got government regulations, you've got, how is the virus affecting that market, whether there's been a decrease in cases or a decrease in deaths in that market. When is it safe to advertise, hey, come to our destination? Like I said, our team has come up with this algorithm to provide that information for you, and we're offering a free market report. We're calling it Recovery Triggers. And if you'd like a free Recovery Trigger report for your target market where you want to draw visitors from, please email me directly at adam@relicagency.com. Or you can go to recoverytriggers.relicagency.com and we'll get you set up with a free report, and we even have the ability to send you a weekly recurring report so you can see what's happening in that market on a weekly basis and make sure you're launching your acquisition campaign at the perfect time.